As you're talking, I think about something that I always bring up to people when they complain about like the government, right? They're like, the government's screwing me. And I'll say to them, the government isn't screwing you. There's a person, there's a bureaucrat. No, but I'm being serious about this because your example is perfect, which is that we don't know who to blame. And we're like, the blob is to blame. And I always say to people when they blame an institution, the bank screwed me over today. The bank didn't do it. There's some person behind the screen that's saying rejected or I'm not going to help you or whatever. A person is screwing you. Now, maybe in the future AI screws you, but that's another story. But I think that you're on to something here because this really goes against if the election's supposed to be a referendum, right? We need to vote out Biden or Harris because they're not doing their job. We have a better solution. And if they can obfuscate and make this a blob. What are you talking about? I wasn't responsible. It was his job. No. It was her job. What are you talking about? No one's even heard from me. I haven't been around. I mean, I actually think that what you're saying is important for us to understand so intrinsically because a campaign is supposed to be, I'm good, you're bad. Here's my policies versus your policies. And if we can't pin the tail on the donkey and it's a blob, that's trouble for us, right? That's what they want. They don't want, Kamala's like, what are you talking about? I'm only vice president. I don't do anything, right? You know me. I was in charge of like the space program or something. I go to funerals. Biden's like, I haven't been seen in 20 days. What are you talking about? How can you blame me? And I think that this is a problem that we're facing that you're pointing out, which is if we can't start to focus on what she is responsible for, then the American people aren't. And they're going to go to vote and say, yeah, things are upset, but it wasn't her fault, was it? Right? I mean, I think what you're getting at is a very big problem that we have.
And there's no precedent for it, at least in any of our lifetime. So we're in kind of uncharted territory here. You saw elections that were a little bit like this in the 19th century. But, well, you saw a president running for a non-consecutive second term in the 19th century in Grover Cleveland. But you also saw these kind of shakeups, last-minute fights at the convention. 1880, James Garfield becomes the nominee, comes out of nowhere. But we haven't seen anything like that in recent memory.
But the fact that you can get no votes, lose in the primary system, in other words, you had 14 or 15 people, she was the first one out, and that you can then be picked to run for president, it seems to me actually unconstitutional.
So now we're running against an incumbent administration, but the incumbent, the actual president, lost a single presidential debate so badly that he's no longer the candidate, but he is still the president, sort of. And so in some ways, Kamala is running with the strength of the incumbency without any of the responsibilities of the job. They haven't invoked the 25th Amendment. Biden hasn't stepped down. So she can just go out there and campaign and raise money. She's done a pretty good job of raising money. But she's also got some of the advantages of a challenger campaign. And she has this advantage in spades, namely, no one can point to anything she really believes because she contradicts herself all the time and she speaks in that vague wine mom gobbledygook language about being unburdened by what has been and how we all love yellow school buses. So it's tricky. Now you can find clips of her though. She says, I want Medicare for all for illegal aliens. She says that, she wants to raise money for the violent rioters in Minneapolis. And she's obviously doubling down on that by picking the governor who let them roam free. She is the most left-wing member of the Senate when she was there. So you can try to get her on particular issues. The question is, will it stick? Will we be able to penetrate? Because she's got not a honeymoon period that will last until November with the establishment media, and they are totally on board. And so as far as I can tell, you got all the news networks left. You've got much of the digital media left, all the social media platforms left, with the exception of X. So we have the smallest of the social media platforms. It's a glimmer of hope to get that message out there, but it's a slim one.
Yeah, I want to talk about X and the Daily Wire and some other things going on in just a few minutes because there's some really cool developments that are happening in that world. But I want to stick on this for a second. It was interesting because, again, as you talk, I think. That's just how it goes. Noel Spicer. And I was thinking about this, right? He didn't do anything during the George Floyd riots in Minneapolis. She then funds the people who do get in trouble to get them out. She keeps the border open. He wants to have a ladder factory. I mean, they are literally like the Batman and Robin. Like, it's like each issue, it's not like a lot of times you have, like, you think about the J.D. Vance rollout, everyone's like, well, here's what J.D. Vance once said. How does that square? They're like this cute little couple where it's like, hey, guess what? On this issue, I took it to a new level, and then you did this. And I mean, they're like a Reese's peanut butter cup. She's the chocolate and he's the peanut butter, or vice versa. But like, they really are a cute little couple when it comes to these policies that like stick together.
It's, you know, Sean, I don't know. I sometimes think conservatives use the term Marxist and communist and a little too much. You know, we paint with too broad a brush sometimes. I try not to do it as much. However, it is worth remembering that Kamala Harris is the daughter of a Marxist economist. She was raised in a Marxist household, and the transportation secretary for Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, is the son of a very famous Marxist professor, Joseph Buttigieg, who translated Antonio Gramsci, the famous Italian Marxist, his prison notebooks. And so, in a way, I think what we're seeing with this new generation of Democrat candidates is the flourishing, that we're seeing the fruit of the generation of leftists that took over the universities, that engaged in the long march through the institutions. So for much of our lifetimes, we've had Democrats who, they're soft on communism. Yeah, they're pretty left. They're bleeding hearts, but they're still within the American norm. In recent years, that has not really been the case. You've had politicians openly embracing the epithet socialist. Tim Walz said it. He said, one man's socialist is another man's neighbor. You have now socialists in the Congress, open socialists in the Congress. And I think Kamala's leaning into that. She hasn't quite used that label, but she's leaning into it. And so when she picks Walz, she's planning on this being a get out the base kind of election. And in some ways, that's what Trump was doing, I think, with J.D. Vance. J.D. is a real conservative, and he's checks a lot of other boxes. Military service from the Rust Belt, came from nothing and was able to really make something of himself. But there's no real appeal across the aisle here, other than the Trump movement trying to realign Republican politics, which I think it's done pretty successfully. But here you've just got basically a fair fight, I think. The conservatives who want the normal, traditional return to an American way of life, and you've got people who are genuinely radical, who when the radicals of the 60s were talking about revolution, this is the fruit of that.
Do you agree? I had Newt Gingrich on the show a little while ago, and Roger Stone, and I think, not to name drop, I know you have some good guests too.
No, some of my best friends, like King Charles, maybe you've heard of him, or...
I don't want to say like I know a lot of people, but anyway, I was talking to Donald Trump, and but everybody that I talk to seems to agree that we have these clips of Kamala Harris saying, I'm a radical, I believe in this, all of this, where she's saying it herself about the border, about, all of the issues that are polarizing. We should just literally stick to her words. I feel like, to your point, like we overuse Marxist and liberal, and it's Sean Spicer saying it, Michael Knowles saying it, Ben Shapiro saying it, right? Why don't we just run a campaign where we say, this is Kamala Harris on Kamala Harris. Do you agree? Do you want this?
Right. Biden launched his 2020 campaign by misquoting Trump. But don't forget that first ad of the 2020 campaign, Biden came out and he said, Donald Trump called Nazis fine people in Charlottesville. And they use actually deceptively edited cuts, because if you play it, the right. cut 2 sentences later, he says, I'm not talking about Nazis, they're evil, they should be condemned. But that was the approach. Biden was using Trump's own words against him. And so if the Democrats can do that against the Republicans dishonestly, at the very least, Republicans should be able to do it against the Democrats honestly.
Yeah. All right. I want to ask you one last thing about this, because I have some other issues I want to get to, but you brought up the stolen valor thing. You've never served in the military, right?
I have not.
Okay. I think this stolen valor issue is a big one, but I'm biased, right? Because I understand it. I asked the question about you because I wonder, does this resonate with people who might not be as familiar with the military, right? So he's using the title Command Sergeant Major, retired. He didn't stay in grade 2 years. which a lot of folks, especially Army folks, enlisted folks, believe that that is a title that he didn't earn, right? The media took a hit at several other people over the last several decades for stolen valor, using titles, wearing awards, claiming credit to achievements that weren't theirs. Do you think that this issue matters?
I think your fear about this is somewhat well-founded. Part of the reason it matters to me, I have not served in the military. A lot of my family has. Some of them served for their whole careers. Some of them served for just a little bit of a stint. So I've been around it a lot, and I recognize that matters to a number of people. However, there was this terrible statistic that came out some years ago that only about 1% of Americans serve in the military in any capacity. And so the number of Americans who even have family members or close friends who've served in the military is relatively quite small compared to past generations. Maybe that won't resonate quite as much. What it does do, I think, is take a little wind out of the sails of the Democrats' attacks on Trump as a liar, someone who exaggerates his career. I mean, that's a very serious thing because it's not just Walz using an improper title. It's Walz wearing hats with the insignia of the Special Forces. A Special Forces account on social media just came out and said, this is completely unacceptable. This is stolen valor. It's Walz coming out and saying that guns that he wants to ban are the kind the that he took into combat. Walz has never seen 1 second of combat. That line is especially effective when you consider that J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate, does have military experience. A lot of Republicans obviously have served in the military. So I think that can be effective. There are a lot of issues here that I think come up in part because they take the wind out of the sails of Democrats attacking us. So even something like there was a scandal about Kamala Harris's husband. It's public now, and we're not revealing any private sins, that he slept with the babysitter and ruined his marriage, his first marriage. And so why does that come up in a political campaign? Well, in part because the Democrats have been attacking Donald Trump as, the worst kind of man. And Kamala says, I know his type. But actually, Kamala does know that type, and she herself has engaged in a very disreputable behavior in that way. Why bring up Willie Brown? Not just because we want a scandal monger, but because every attack that they lob at Trump, it seems like that attack fits them 3 times over. And so now you're just taking pieces off the board that they can't really use effectively anymore. And at a certain point, once we get through all of it, we're going to have to talk about issues. And I think that's really what the goal of this has to be. Why bring up the stolen valor? Why bring up because at a certain point then you're going to have to get back to record and issues. And there the Republicans, I think, have it.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.